tool that I've been wanting to show you in Photoshop that will help make it easier to make a selection on something that has a very fine, irregular edge, like grass or like maybe a tree up against the sky. I've been showing you how to use the quick select tool and select and mask to isolate areas of your picture so that you can apply an edit to a certain area without affecting the rest of the image. And the first step we generally use when we're trying to make a selection is the quick selection tool. This is a great tool, but it's not perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to select the grass. I want to lighten it up a little bit. And you can see that the quick select tool is not really capable of making the fine distinctions between the blades of grass and the water. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is go into select and mask, which I showed you the other day. Let me put that on overlay, which is how I prefer to work. Um, and this shows you very clearly, you know, we've got this very odd looking edge. If I were to apply an edit to the grass with the selection looking like that, it would look terrible. The other day I showed you how to use the brush tool in select and mask, where you can add or take away from the mask. But even doing that, I'm pressing my Alt key right now to add mask. You can see that even if I chose the tiniest brush, there's no way I'm going to be able to do a good job of selecting each individual blade of grass. So that's where this tool comes in. It's called the Refine Edge Brush tool. Let me click it here. Okay, and what the Refine Edge Brush tool does is it actually does a pretty good job of determining the edge of something irregular like this. It could be blades of grass, it could be hair, it could be fur on an animal. I'll also show you how it can work on a tree up against the sky. Okay, so you probably can't see real well how it's selecting these blades of grass that didn't get selected, but you just kind of have to trust it. It's it's worth taking the time and being careful with. It doesn't always come out perfect on the first try. Um, it takes a little bit of practice, and you can see it's a little bit hard on the computer too. That little circle that I'm getting is telling me that I have to wait because it's taking up a lot of my RAM to do this. These Photoshop programs and Lightroom, they're just a terrible strain on your RAM. Okay, so I think I've done about as good as I'm going to be able to do here. There are some other settings over here. If this doesn't work perfectly, I may try to adjust it with contrast just a little bit, but for the first try, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm going to take it into black and white just so you can see what it did. Okay, so it was, a terrible selection at first, and this looks pretty good. Um, I'm going to go ahead, and it looks like it picked up a little bit of the water that I don't want. And so, whoops, I'm going to just go ahead and paint over that water. I'm not going to be able to get it all. There we go. That should be good enough. Okay, I'm just going to output to a selection. I'm going to tell it okay. And you'll see that when you have it output to a selection, when it has the marching ants, you can't really tell it. It looks like, oh my God, it didn't select all the, all the blades of grass. Don't worry about that. It's just that the marching ants aren't capable of being that specific. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do then is try an exposure adjustment on that. And I'm just going to bring the exposure up. And it looks pretty good. Um, if I get real picky and zoom in, I'm just going to zoom in and see. Not bad. Yeah, that actually does look pretty good. I sometimes you do this on the first try and it still looks a little weird and you have to go back and do it again. But I'm pretty satisfied with that. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out. And just to kind of show you how it might work on, say, trees, let's say I want to lighten up the trees here in the background. So again, let me use my quick select tool. I think I'll go ahead and lighten up that. I want to lighten up that grass along the edge of the water too, but I don't know if there's enough contrast. I may have to just kind of visually decide for myself where the edge of grass is. Whoops. Okay, let's deselect the ground around the trees. Let's say I just want the trees themselves lightened up. Okay, and see, you can see the quick select tool is having a real hard time. Part of this is because there's not enough contrast, but part of it is because the edges of the trees are just so, delicate that it can't tell. Okay, so I'm going to just do the best I can with my quick select tool. I can't really do a whole lot more than that. Let's go back into select and mask. Okay, and I'm still in that black view, black and white view, but this is kind of good because it shows you just how awkward and irregular that selection is. So let me go into overlay so I can see what I'm doing. Let's say I don't want to, well, I'll just include that little building, it doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to take my refine edge tool, I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I'm going to go ahead and just come along the edge of the water here. I really can't see too well on this picture where the water ends and the grass begins, but I think it'll look better. I'm also going to try to pick up a little bit of this reflection right here. Okay, and then the most important is that I get it along the top of the edge of grass and around the edges of the trees. Okay. And I'm going to leave that grass in the foreground down there alone. Okay. And so let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on better. And also so I can see if I'm getting a good selection. Go back to my refine edge tool. I may go ahead and just paint in this area. Whoops. Have to hold my option key. I'm going to go ahead and paint in this area behind the trees because I had a little trouble selecting that. Then come back with my refine edge tool. Bring the brush size down a little bit. Okay, and if you want to get really picky and really make these trees stand out from the ground around them, you need to actually go inside the tree too and get all the negative space that you see in between the leaves. I'm going to use a bigger brush. This is taking too long. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to come down in here. There's some negative space. Over here, there's some negative space inside the tree. All of this is going to make it more realistic. So when you're editing pictures in Photoshop, your ultimate goal is to do it in such a way that it doesn't look photoshopped. And the biggest giveaway to a Photoshop job is when you do a bad selection. And Photoshop has over the years been kind of trying to perfect this tool or versions of this tool, and it's gotten a lot better in recent years. Doing something like this used to require multiple steps. It was very time consuming. You had to use channels, I believe it was. Um, it was really frustrating back in the olden days. And so I'm personally really impressed with this tool. I might have a little weirdness right in here. I don't know about this little building, but let's just kind of, this is just a demo, so let's just kind of ignore it. I mainly want you to see how easy it is to use this tool. Um, but you know, the thing I would say to you about selections is they're well worth putting the time into. I think a lot of the Photoshop tutorials make it look super easy. Just click one button and everything is perfectly selected. That's never ever been my personal experience with Photoshop. A lot of it does depend on the quality of your of the photograph you're working with. You know, the better exposed it is, the more contrast it has, the easier these fast selection techniques work. But if you have a picture like this one where it's a little bit underexposed, there's not enough contrast, it's got very irregular edges. No, those little techniques are not going to work very well, and you'll wind up with a picture that looks very obviously photoshopped. And you know, the whole goal to mastering Photoshop is to make it look not photoshopped. Okay, so from what I can tell, I think I've done a pretty good job on the tree here. I'm just going to take it back into that black and white so I can see what I got. I may have a little weirdness in a couple of areas. Possibly when you see little blurry areas like this, it may look okay after I edit it. If it doesn't, what I would probably want to do would be to come in and paint back in some of these areas and start over. I'll do that just in this one area right here. We'll ignore the rest of it that looks weird. So let me come back with my, I don't know why it just got all blurry like that. It puts a lot of strain on your computer, this technique. It requires a lot of RAM. Okay, so part of the reason that I'm getting a blur here is probably just because there wasn't enough contrast, you know, for even this tool to work. But let's see. It might wind up looking okay. Let me just go back into overlay because that's kind of what I like as a default. I've got it output to selection and I'm going to click OK. Let me zoom out. Okay, and again, I'm going to make another exposure layer. So click that little button that looks like a half moon, click exposure, and I'm going to slide the exposure slider. That doesn't look bad. Yeah, all those areas I was concerned about that I thought looked a little weird, they look okay. The only thing I can see that I'm not happy with is this area right here, okay, where I selected the grass. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. That does not look good. So what I'm going to do to fix that so that I don't have to go back and reselect everything, I'm just going to mask it out. And so here's my mask right here. I've got my brush with my black paint. Let me make the brush a little smaller. And I'm just gonna drag, I've got my opacity for the paint set at 100%. Now I want my brush bigger now. And I'm just gonna paint the mask right over that, and it's gonna get rid of that edit right there. Still looks a little weird, And I'm not really sure why. Maybe I'm just being too picky. Let me zoom out and I think it'll look just fine. Maybe this area was already a little bit fuzzy in the photograph. That might be what the case was. But let me zoom out one more time. Sorry, I think I just moved my window. Um, and let me zoom out again. There we go. And I'll just punch that exposure up just a little bit more to exaggerate it so you can see a little bit better. But it looks pretty good up in here. So we've got the grass, we've got the trees, um, we've we've got a pretty good selection. So once again, that was called the Refine Edge tool. It's in Select and Mask, and you can go into Select and Mask when you use any of the selection tools.